Okay, so this is a lecture on the dermis, which is part of your skin. So derm actually means skin, like dermitis, or what is it? A dermatologist might study the skin. And so this is the layer that is beneath the epidermis. So this is beneath the epidermis. Now, the epidermis had those layers, but you'll notice when you look at the epidermis that there is no blood vessels in them. But in the dermis, we say that this layer is vascular. So this is a different type of tissue. This is not epithelial tissue, and it is a type of connective tissue. So we have connective tissue being either loose or dense. Dense tends to mean that it has lots of collagen fibers in it. And loose means that the fibers are just loosely interwoven. And so we can talk about the two layers of connective or dermis. So the two layers of the dermis. So the first layer is what is referred to as the papillary layer. Now, papilla, actually means like a little nipple. Weird, but we will see if we look at the structure, this above here, all of this right here is your epidermis. This outer layer, the stratum corneum, right, that we shed, that actually ends up in our house dust, right? The papillary layer kind of forms these little nipples or little invaginations into the lower layers of the epidermis. So this is my papillary layer of my dermis. So it is actually loose connective tissue, and it's a type of connective tissue that is actually the most common type of connective tissue that we have in our body. And it connects, right, the epidermis to the lower dermis. So this is what is called areolar connective tissue. So this is loose connective tissue. So when we look at this, this is in contrast to the lower layer, which is called the reticular layer. And so when we look at the reticular layer, it is dense, but it is irregular connective tissue. So we say that it is dense, irregular connective tissue. Dense, meaning that it has a lot of collagen fibers, so lots of fibers. So if you have ever skinned an animal, you know that one of the things that you have to do is you have to scrape, right? So when you're scraping the hide, for example, you have to scrape off the epidermis, you have to scrape off the papillary layer of the dermis, and then you get to this, like, you get these fibers coming off, and then that is the reticular layer. So the reticular layer is super strong, and this is actually where or what we call leather. And so that would be, you know, if we're looking at leather or hide, that would be the reticular layer. So let's look at an image of that using a light microscope. So this is my papillary layer, and then this is my reticular layer. And so both of these layers make up the dermis, and this would be vascular. So this means that it has a blood supply. Okay. And there also are nerves that come in here. There are sensory structures that are located in the dermis. And there's also lymphatic vessels, which play an immune function, but also help to get rid of extra fluid within the dermis. And so that would be the dermal layer. Now, below the dermis, we have another type of layer, and it is called the hypodermis. So let's let's look at this diagram. This shows the papillary layer, loose connective tissue. Look at this. This is the dermis. This is all of those collagen fibers. This skin is quite dark. So this would be the basal layer with the melanocytes. The melanin comes up, is inside those cells. And then the outer layer is the keratinocytes that are dead, that will be eventually sloughed off. And remember, the reason why that this epidermis is stratified is it's protective. So like friction, for example, it protects your body and you slough off that, and you're always constantly replacing your skin, your outer epidermis, through the cell division, through mitosis. Now the dermis, if we get a burn or if we get an injury, the dermis is white because of the collagen. And so it is sometimes scar tissue forms with those collagen fibers. And so sometimes you can see damage to the skin in the form of scar tissue that is white in color. So let's talk about the hypodermis. So hypo means below. You'll see this word all the time in your classes, where when we talk about hypothermia or we talk about hypoglycemia, right? If you talk about hypotonic solutions, so you see this word all the time. So this means below the dermis. So the below the dermis is where we have the adipose tissue. Right? So this is the subcutaneous fat. And so that is where we store energy in our subcutaneous fat. And that also actually insulates the body. So it's insulation. So it helps to retain heat so that you're not losing heat to the environment. And it also keeps the body a little bit cooler because you're not gaining heat from the environment. So it is insulative, right? It insulates the body against changes in temperature.